I knew as early as February 2020 that I needed to do something.
I recognized that there was a systematic problem and that this was not about hydroxychloroquine, it was something larger.
Fear shut the world down, and people made a lot of money at it as they were killing us.
I was asked to speak at a freedom rally that was set up to discredit my reputation.
Whoever orchestrated this must not have the safety of this nation in mind.
Medicine and politics should be separated. These doctors were handcuffed.
The American public has awakened. We have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights, and we're going to hold them accountable.
It is a natural progression of a man of God or woman of character to see injustice, to seek it out, and then to act upon it.
Do you hear me? We will never lock down again. This is the hill we die on.
Don't miss New American Heroes with attorney Warner Mendenhall and John Davidson, Mondays on BrokenTruth.tv.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down. First of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down.
With Broken Truth today, I am still John Davidson, and with me is the lovely and talented Warner Mendenhall, Esquire. Hey, Warner, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
Living the dream as always, my friend. Today we have a pretty impressive lineup. We've got Clinton Ohlers from PhD from Safe Blood, and Kevin McKernan, who has ripped the internet in half with his research into mRNA. But before we get there, I want to run two clips that sort of set the stage for what this episode's about. And that's really the blood supply and the mRNA spike protein production and things like that. So let's hear what RFK said last week about, I think it was last week or the week before, about the mRNA platform.
But as the pandemic showed us, mRNA vaccines don't perform well against viruses that infect the upper respiratory tract. Here's the problem. mRNA only codes for a small part of the viral proteins, usually a single antigen. One mutation and the vaccine becomes ineffective. This dynamic drives a phenomenon called antigenic shift, meaning that the vaccine paradoxically encourages new mutations and can actually prolong pandemics as the virus constantly mutates to escape the protective effects of the vaccine.
So now we had that, and a few weeks ago we had the Thrive in 25 event, and Michelle Utter, Nurse Michelle, she came and spoke and discussed the frustration that she and many vaccine injured feel from lack of representation, lack of support from the medical industry that allowed this to go into the market, and an industry that refuses to even acknowledge that these people exist. So I'm going to show this quick clip.
I'm still making spike at 629 days. Oh, crud. I said it. 1,629 days after my shot. Still making spike. It didn't take a Yale study. We were bringing this. A year ago, I went to Colorado where Warner was. Doctors came up to the mic and they said, "We don't even know if you're making spike." Yes, I had my records. Here you go. I would have shown them. I would have pulled it up on my phone. I would have done anything. The thing is, nobody's listening to us. I'm not trying to fuss. But what I am trying to say is we need help. We do need people to fight for us. I know all of you are tired, but we still need help because our health is getting worse. This year, I got worse than I was the first 2 years. I got hurt by the COVID vaccine. I had COVID in 2023, and then this past February. Now I'm on a cancer protocol. I have more diagnoses than I ever had in my life. I have a bag full of medicines, and that's what I have to look forward to. We have no lawyers, no one fighting for us. We're not acknowledged on the VICP. The CICP, 98% of the claims are denied. When are we going to get a break? When is somebody going to listen to us?
So that's pretty powerful, and I think nobody could really say it better.
Unfortunately, I share her frustration. I can't say I understand all that she's been through. There's no way to understand it unless you're experiencing it. But this DNA integration and the problem that it's doing in terms of dysregulating the immune system, in terms of causing all kinds of other odd health issues to arise. I mean, the spike protein, and we'll hear from Kevin in a minute, but it goes everywhere. It affects everything. It affects everybody differently. There could be thousands of potential outcomes here that are bad for the individual. And we see it, like Ed Dowd has continually pointed out, the labor statistics, we have approximately 3 million additional disabled. We can presume from the data and the way this is coming out with the increased deaths and now the increased disabilities that the causality of that is the vaccination, quote unquote vaccination. And
let's go ahead and let's bring in Kevin and Clinton.
The fact we all need to push for a societal response to this, because we just don't have it. It's very frustrating for me as an attorney too. We have a case that we're doing, and one case for one person is a ton of medical records, a ton of issues, and we have millions of people who need help, desperately need help.
Yeah. Kevin, Clinton, welcome to the show. Kevin, can you sort of give us a summary of what you've been doing? I mean, it's been, I can barely keep up with everything that's going on. But the last week or two, you've been really on fire.
Yeah, sure. So we stumbled into finding this residual DNA in these vaccines several years ago. And about 10 labs around the world have now replicated that. A few have made it through peer review. Our paper as well is going through that fun process. And what that has got people looking at is all the literature around how long does this DNA or RNA last inside of people? How long have we found it? Because there are patients like the one you just showed us that are detecting spike out 1,600 days. There's others I've heard 1,700 days, 1,800 days. Like, this is a phenomenally long time for a protein to stick around after it's been transfected and expressed in cells. Usually the longest lasting proteins you have in your body are like keratin on your fingernails. It's not normal for a protein to stick around this long. So it raises several hypotheses. Is there something about this RNA that's not degrading? That's quite possibly true. Is it the DNA that's finding itself into some sort of stem cell in the body and continuing to somehow express spike protein? Or is it the protein itself that just somehow hides in the body and continues to express? We don't have a good answer on that. What I'll do is I'll give you a quick review of the literature out there that looks at the nucleic acid side of this. We've already heard about the Yale study saying 709 days. The Patterson labs was looking at the protein as well, and they found the spike protein 245 days out, and they stopped looking at 245 days. They were primarily looking at vax injured people who had long vax. So that's an enriched population where they have a very high percentage of those patients had spike persistence. On the DNA and RNA side, we have less data in that, yes, we found it in the vials. We have since looked at studies that have looked at DNA and RNA, and they didn't necessarily discriminate between the two in these processes. And there they found it in the heart tissue 30 days out in the Krausen study. They found it 60 days in lymph node in the Rolchen study. They found it in plasma in the Castrovutis study 28 days out. They found it in breast milk 5 days out, but it's probably longer because that study had a bit of a compromised PCR. They've seen it in placenta. Those are sort of the collections of some of the studies, the Gonzalez studies in placenta. So there's a collection of those studies that if anyone wants those citations, they're in another video that I did with You're the Voice with Efren Fenigson at the Bitcoin conference. We have all those citations for people to look at. What has then occurred since then is we went looking through these studies that are done to study the vax injured and the vax and unvaxxed, if you will. They sequence people's RNA and they study them to see, okay, when you're vaccinated, how does your RNA expression change versus not vaccinated? Well, in some of those studies, they submit that data to the NCBI SRA. It's a short read archive. And other researchers can go combing through that to see, well, is there any of the plasmid DNA still in there? And there's 5 studies like that in the SRA where we find it. It's in people's blood. So there's Chakrabarty did some great work. He's out of Milan that looked at this and was finding this in the Ryan and the ODAC study. There's plasmid DNA in those RNA-seq studies, and it shouldn't be there because RNA sequencing likes to sequence RNA, not DNA. And when DNA slips through, that's a sign that there's a lot there because they're taking methods to try to purify the RNA away from the DNA, and it's still showing up. There's 3 other studies that are referenced in that podcast. One is outside of the Ryan study, the ODAC study. There's a Lee study, there's the Nabel study, and there is the Krowski study. And all of them are examples of us finding the DNA, not just in the vials, but in people. So the next question that's really meant to be addressed is, okay, where is it in these people? Is it floating in the plasma? Is it inside the cells? Is it integrated into the genome? We don't have a hard answer for that. I think everyone is assuming it's integrated somewhere or it's potentially episomally replicating as its own piece of DNA inside of the cell, mainly because of this persistence we're seeing. We're finding patients that continually express spike, and what would be consistent with that observation is that the DNA is probably floating around longer than the RNA and to some degree making a continual reservoir of spikes somewhere in the body. But we're still organizing IRBs and trying to get studies done to precisely nail what flavor of contamination is it, where is it residing in the body, and how long is it actually there. But that's what I think is so important, and why you brought Clinton on, is that this implies the blood supply is contaminated. And that can be frightening for anyone who can witness a patient like Michelle saying she's still expressing spike. Nobody wants that blood. They're going to want a clean source to ensure they don't inherit something that's left over from the vaccine program. Okay. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a big problem. What happens if our blood supply is contaminated? Are there ways to clean it out? I mean, is there any method of purification that can be used?
Well, I think I'll certainly defer to Clinton on this in a moment here, but I think the first thing they have to set up doing is start screening for spike protein and for the nucleic acids, just both of them, to start assessing this, because right now we have different windows on the persistence here. Right now, the nucleic acids have not been recorded as long as the spike protein. I did see a post from McCullough's group recently that they found a patient with DNA or RNA out like 3 years. I haven't yet seen that paper or reviewed it, but that is that would be consistent with what we're seeing in the Patterson study and the Yale study. So when they had this with HIV, they were very reluctant to test the blood because it kind of unveils this holy shit moment. Okay, if this is truly here, they need to rapidly start finding recipients or blood donors that were not vaccinated to backfill the contaminated supply they have. And that was met with a tremendous amount of resistance during HIV, but eventually they started doing it. So blood is routinely screened for a variety of different pathogens like this. So it's not outside their capabilities. I think they're just afraid to look under the hood, if you will.
Kevin, can they scientifically determine whether it was a spike protein derived from the vaccine or the virus? Is there a difference?
There is a difference. There's 2 proteins that are different. Now, it's a little bit more expensive to do that type of differentiation. Usually the ELISAs are not as sensitive. Correct me if anyone's found one that is. That would be great to know if there's an ELISA specific to the 2 protein change. I understand you have to do that with mass spec, which is what the Patterson group did. There's a good follow. I think Dr. Yo-Yo on Twitter has he's one of the authors in the Patterson paper. And I think it handles Yostradamus. But he can go into details on exactly what mass spec methods they're using to differentiate those two. So that's a little bit more of a pricier assay, and he can probably comment best on how well it would scale up screening the blood supply for these types of things. Now one detail in their paper, the blood is loaded with red blood cells that don't have a nucleus, okay, and they're very transcriptionally not very active. They're the kind of like bubbles of almost like LMPs that burst out of other cells that just have some ribosomes that can to translate some of the RNAs, but they don't have a nucleus. So those cells probably aren't playing a role. And when they go and look at this, it's the monocytes. They have to really a small percentage of the cells in blood that where they're finding the spike protein hiding. So they may have to sort the blood to screen it correctly, like spin it to do a Buffy code isolation or flow sorting type of thing to really zero in on the cells that are most likely to have this.
And Clinton, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of screening our current blood supply has to make sure these things aren't in there, or do we not even have that?
Yeah, no. In regards to COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, there is no screening that's done, not even the simplest forms possible. Because the blood banks hold that the vaccine was safe and effective. And they even in 2022, I saw a tweet from 2022 where they were saying the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine doesn't enter the bloodstream. So, which of course we now know is totally false. But this is something they refuse to do. This is something that we're pushing for, and legislation in different states is pushing for. Referring back to what you and Kevin were talking about, two things that are really important to have happen would be testing of blood on site, so that before it goes into a patient, there's knowledge of what's in it, just for the very purpose of informed consent. But obviously, if you had a bag of blood on the shelf that was heavily laden with spike protein, a person would want to be able to reject that. Without testing, we're not going to have that. Now, another thing you can do that is technologically much simpler, which is not to say that the other is not necessary, it is. But if you wanted an immediate free option that costs nobody any money, would be simply to track mRNA donor blood and non-mRNA donor blood, and at least have non-mRNA donor blood available in emergencies for people who request it, such as the currently unvaccinated or people who have had adverse reactions to the vaccine. They certainly would be at higher risk than from mRNA blood, although we think everyone is potentially at risk, and the risk is, to be honest, unknown because the research isn't being done to ascertain it. But what we do know from Kevin McKernan's work, and then what Peter McCullough has just discovered, and the Kaiser Family Foundation poll that shows that 21% of Americans definitely plan to get the COVID shot again in the fall. We know it's an ongoing problem, and we know that the risk is significantly greater than zero.
Can I ask a simple question? And I appreciate all the testing and that we need to do the testing, but what we've heard from the phlebotomists and the blood technicians that we've talked to directly is you can just see the difference. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't look like normal blood. It's much heavier. It's much harder to flow. I guess, do you have any thoughts on that, Clinton?
Well, that's a fantastic revelation, and I would love to talk with you further about that. I'll tell you what we did have on that. When early in this whole rollout, there were nurses in Switzerland who were kind of part of the resistance in Europe. We're based out of Switzerland because that was where we were started. And the nurses were reporting to our founder, George Della Pietra, that they were seeing exactly the kind of thing you were saying. They could recognize there was a difference between the vaccinated blood and that it would coagulate faster. And so that led to the horrifying solution that they would then try to get this blood into the patients faster because it had a shorter shelf life.
And then the other thing that I know is that people are now having their blood essentially cleaned. Is the word apheresis, is that the right word for that? They're taking somebody's blood, they're running it through machines to cleanse it. And
There's a plasmapheresis they may be using potentially. I've heard of those techniques. The other people I'd bring into this equation, to your point of whether you concede or not, there's another person, Kevin McKernan, not me, a different Kevin, but McCairn. He has been working on looking at amyloidosis and this, which may be contributing this fibrinogen-like clots. And that might be another angle of looking at this. He has also said that he can notice the difference in the vaccinated versus unvaccinated blood, and maybe that's a cheaper or faster assay. I know of a group in Germany called Inmodia that's looking at this from a spike protein standpoint and a PCR standpoint. I think Neo7 that Dr. Catanzaro is leading is looking at this from an RNA sequencing standpoint, where they can see if there's transcriptionally, if there are different transcriptional profiles in the blood. That might be a little bit of a longer turnaround time test, but it's still very informative for actually treating the patient themselves. So there's a couple different windows on this. If there's a way to just quickly test for coagulation capacity, that might be the cheapest and fastest thing someone could do on the spot. But I think an important thing to point out here is, and the free solution is getting a registry of people, voluntary, collection of people who are unvaccinated and are universal donor, type O blood. If we can organize that for the community, that would be very helpful for people who need transfusions.
But what if, just a virus devil's advocate, if they've been infected with COVID, if the difference is so difficult to detect, maybe there isn't that much of a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Now, my experience so far, looking at all this data from spike protein levels between the vaccinated and the people who are sick, there is probably a 10 to 100-fold higher spike expression in the vaccinated than there is in the people with COVID. Additionally to that, I do think those two mutations are playing a role in making the protein sit in this pre-perfusion state. So that is actually a more pathogenic spike than what we get from the virus. So I'm not as worried about COVID if the person had it 90 days in the past and when you collect the blood. I think that's I think the body's probably healed, adapted, and the blood's back to normal. It's really the vaccination that I think is driving this coagulopathy that is unlike anything we've seen, even to people that have viremia from the virus.
What about shedding on family members? Let's say you have a family member who is vaccinated, and as I learned in some of my research, that SV40 is sexually transmissible. Is it possible that the spike protein issues in a vaccinated person is also sexually transmissible?
Before we move on, just a minute, John.
I'm sorry, I always go to the sex questions.
Well, I that too, but we do have an audience. We have a very up-to-date audience, but some of these terms, we are throwing a ton of terms around, and I do want to just step back and make sure that we're explaining, that SV is simian virus 40. It was discovered, accidentally, I guess, put into the polio vaccine, in the late 50s. It has certain capacities that are helpful in the environment, in the lab environment, to cause cells to divide. Kevin, you know this way better than me. But I want people to understand that this is a potentially cancer-causing ingredient in the Pfizer vaccine that was undisclosed at the FDA.
Yes, this is true. Now the Pfizer shots don't have the full SV40 virus, but they do have some components in there that there is very damning literature on those pieces of DNA being replication competent in mammalian cells. And I think this is really important to that persistence question. Why is it sticking around? Well, there's a piece of DNA in the Pfizer vaccine that teaches mammalian cells to replicate itself once it's inside of a mammalian cell. That's a mammalian origin of replication. So it instructs mammalian cells to make more of itself once it's present. That to me is what I'm really concerned about in terms of what might be driving persistence. Because if that gets into a stem cell, your cells may never let go of it. And Ulrich Kammermer has done really fascinating work taking the Pfizer vaccines and transfecting them into cells and tracking SV40 through several cell passages, showing that it sticks with these cells throughout cell division, suggesting it is replication competent to some extent. So that whole virus contaminated the polio vaccines. And what has always plagued the polio epidemiology is that they tried to look for cancer signals in the vaxxed and unvaxxed, and those two populations got really cloudy, if you will, because they were shedding. So people who were designated unvaccinated may have get exposed to the SV40 through contact through other people who were vaccinated. Now, to what extent, and to John's question, how much is this going on with the actual current vaccines? And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that I would turn you toward the Midwestern Doctors Substack on this with Pierre Corey. They've gone through all the medical evidence that they believe it's happening. I've not caught it in the act, like gotten a PCR reaction to prove it's happening. And maybe it's not the DNA content that's moving. Maybe it's just the spike protein that's on exosomes. There is a paper out there that demonstrated there are exosomes getting popped out of cells, which are little fat bubbles that are coated in spike protein. It's the Bansal paper. And they tried to sell this as being a benefit to your immunity. But when you see exosomes that have spike, exosomes get expressed in your sweat and in your breath. So that's actually a shedding risk. So they never looked at shedding. We don't know if this is happening. They conveniently were able to not have to look at that problem, and they're not being asked to look at that problem with these self-amplifying RNA vaccines either. And this is, I think, an area where everyone needs to draw a line that these things cannot shed. There's a major consent issue here if they're shedding onto other people. So I don't have a hard answer for you as to whether we've caught the DNA doing that. I have not seen a paper that's demonstrated that. There's one paper that demonstrated a very similar plasmid doing this in Seattle. It's called the Beck et al. Paper. These people were developing vaccines. Their vaccine was for nucleocapsid, and it turned out it infected the whole lab and escaped into some housemates. And so they were soon expressing nucleocapsid in other people outside of the laboratory. So this plasmid that Pfizer is using has been shown to move a nucleocapsid outside of the laboratory in the Seattle area. So I suspect it is happening with people who are vaccinated. I don't know to what degree it's causing symptoms. I would assume it would be lower symptoms to anyone who's a recipient of shedding. And if you go through Pierre's work and the Midwestern Doctors' work, they hypothesize that there is a subset of individuals who are very sensitive to spike, and they're the ones that you see the shedding in. So it may not be a risk to everybody, but they seem to have pretty firm conviction that this is occurring, particularly when you look at the menstruation issues that are happening in women, and a lot of the other anecdotes from patients saying that they were never vaccinated, exposed to people who were, and came down with spikopathy-like symptoms.
Yeah, there was just the lawsuit filed last week by a whistleblower at a hospital. Warner, you might be able to speak to this better than me, where the hospital was covering up what is a 5,000% increase in infant mortality or stillbirths, or miscarriages. From vaccinated people. And the hospital did not want this data out, and they fired a nurse, I believe, who reported. Are you guys aware of this?
Yeah, 100%. I won't go into all the details, but we saw that very early on, and I learned that there are different terms. It's a stillbirth late in the day. It's a miscarriage earlier in the day. So there's different terms for that throughout the time. I don't have them all offhand, but I think there's 4 different terms that they use. But I mean, we saw it. So it's Michelle Stewart who filed that lawsuit, and Scott Street and John Howard are attorneys on that, along with another attorney. I wish I remembered his name. It's an excellent complaint. If you haven't found it online, you need to look at it. It's an excellent complaint and really tells Michelle's story very well. So I'm very pleased that she found really good counsel for that case. But this appeared immediately. I happened to work around the corner from a hospital, and I had the OBGYN nurses come in to see me one day. This is in the spring of 2021. And it had spiked remarkably here locally. And they were talking about the numbers of fetuses that they were taking to the crematorium from the hospital. And they were just appalled by that. And Michelle saw the same thing. They were putting the fetuses in buckets. That was kind of one of the more remarkable things about it. There was an email about it, which she publicized. Now I think it must have been almost 2 years ago. But yeah, it's just, it's just horrific in terms of the impact on maternity that these shots have had, and the fact that anyone recommended that pregnant women get a shot it was really, really unethical.
So how do we fix this, guys? It doesn't look like we have a lot of good options if it's potentially contagious from even people who are vaccinated. Is there anything?
Yeah, to maybe kind of clarify a little bit on that. One of the reasons that we don't think it is as contagious, say through shedding, would be, for example, that an early study that was done in August of 23, the Brogna et al. Study looked at the persistence of spike protein in the blood, and one of their comparisons was they compared the mRNA vaccinated individuals with those who received a quote virtual through natural, naturally contracted it through COVID-19, right? Just picked up COVID from somebody else. And so natural transmission, you'd call that. And the group that just got COVID naturally, if we can call it natural, was much, much lower in terms of like Kevin McKernan just said, that quantity and also the duration in which that spike was in their blood. I mean, we're talking a matter of days versus months to years. And now we know from further studies that it's multiple years, or for somebody like, Hurricane Shelley. So that is there. So there are differences. In other words, is my belief currently that if you can protect yourself from exposure through the vaccine itself or through a blood transfusion, you should be pretty good.
Yeah, I would confer with that. That I think that the shedding risks, I would expect them to be exponentially lower than injection, right? Or from blood or from the vaccine. But there are probably some sensitized people out there to small amounts of it that have these symptoms. But I don't think we should go panicking everyone. Sky is falling on the shedding front, mainly because I don't think we have hard numbers on the frequency of which it occurs.
And Kevin, if I could interject a question, when you're talking about shedding, you mentioned that the spike can get wrapped in an exosome, which allows it to shed. But since the mRNA, the extra mRNA that's kicked out of a cell gets wrapped in its own fat bubble, does that mean that can also be shed also? Is that a different?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. That's why I've been a little ambivalent on this topic, in that so if the mRNA or the plasmid moved in the exosome as well, then there's a concern that it could replicate in the recipient. And if you end up with like a virus, a small inoculum turns into more later. I've not seen evidence for the nucleic acid moving in the exosomes. I've only seen that Bansal paper that showed there was exosomes on the outside. I don't think they bothered to look for the mRNA in the exosomes. But that is an important study that I hope someone performs. There was some work from Comer's paper showing that spike was coming out of exosomes in her cell lines, and I think she's been going back to look to see if any of the mRNA or the DNA is going to end up in those as well. She has a method for separating those, but I've not caught it in the act of moving the nucleic acids. The nucleic acids would worry me more because that's the code that could make more of it in the recipient. Until I see that, I'm assuming it's just the spike protein that's getting excreted in sweat or in breath, and people are getting a microdose of that, but some people are sensitized enough to that creates a problem in the subset of people.
So what can we do to help people like Nurse Michelle, right? Is it nanokinase? Is it not that? Like, is there something that could be done? For example, let's say that decision makers in Washington, D.C. were watching this right now. What could you encourage them to do in terms of research with people like Shell to help them?
I would. I'll let Clinton weigh in here just in a moment. There is a paper we recently published. It's a preprint that is looking at the RNA sequences in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, showing which pathways are off, and sometimes that can be informative on treatment. Neo7 and Dr. Catanzaro are specializing in this. I'd encourage them to contact them. There's another very insightful group at IncelDX with Patterson's lab They have another approach of different immune markers that they look at to see what's off on the CD4 counts and the CD8 counts and CD16 counts, and they're coming up with some creative solutions on this that are worth looking at. Of course, you've seen the stuff from the Wellness Center as well. But and in terms of that, that's one individual case. I think for a broader message, I think we do need to get organized around how to identify blood that's unvaccinated, so that we can source that and create some type of Uber-like market share that allows people to find each other that need to share blood. That's helpful for planned surgeries and planned transfusions. It doesn't help for emergencies, or maybe there's a way to make it help for emergencies with rapid testing. But that's an area that I think is underserved right now.
Well, I want to point out, I think, Clinton, you can tell us there have been some problems with the people who have tried to store their blood for their own use, and they're planning for a surgery, and yet there's been some real interference with that, at least from what I've understood on my end.
Yeah. So, I agree with Kevin 100%. And that's why Safe Blood exists, where we are that community that is providing blood from non-mRNA vaccinated donors to recipients, whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated, who don't want to receive blood that's just off the shelf with, say, a 70 to 80% chance of being from a mRNA vaccine recipient, right? So that community exists, and that's exactly the challenge that we face, is that we can get blood to people. I think the fastest we've ever done it was in 4 days, right? There's a minimum time required to process the blood, have it, tested, and make sure that it's good, and then get it to a patient. So this works for planned surgeries. Okay. Now, and that's what we do. But what our members are doing by being a part of Safe Blood is they're also helping push these and other initiatives. For example, a woman can do an autologous donation. Say you're a pregnant woman. You may at least hopefully not have an emergency, but it's a possibility you might have need emergency blood. And so then you can do exactly what you said, Warner, which is to store their blood ahead of time. And that way you can store, a small amount of blood, but that will last, roughly about 40 days. So the shelf life is limited, but that's a way you can prepare. Now, it's very important then that the rights to directed donation and autologous donation continue to exist, right? This has been a normal medical freedom. It's been a normal practice for quite a long time, but suddenly with the rollout of the vaccine, the blood banks have increasingly been trying to prevent or hinder people from having these kind of donations. So to give you an example, if somebody lives in Washington State or Oregon, forget it. There's no state law against it, but the hospitals are simply not allowing it. So those patients have to fly to Pennsylvania, Florida, California, other states in order to do a surgery and get blood that they trust is safe.
And I just want to be clear, autologous means your own blood is being used for your own body and your own surgery. So you can sort of donate to yourself ahead of time, have it set aside for that planned surgery. Yeah. And this is where hospitals are actually interfering. You can't even use your own blood in some cases.
To my knowledge, in those states, it's both. I know for certain that it is a directed donation. So let's say, Warner, you and I are matches, and I'm going in for surgery, and I say, I trust Warner's blood. I don't know that I trust somebody else's, and he said he'll donate, right? That was a normal right. It was uncontroversial before the rollout of this vaccine, and now it's become controversial. It's become suppressed. So that's why there is legislation in 11 different states to make this, to keep this as a freedom.
Interesting. I have to be limited in what I say here. Clinton, I did some research because, you guys had gotten a cease and desist from a hospital system because on your website, you listed a place where we got, patients were able to do this type of autologous transfer or whatever. Sorry, I just butchered that word. Anyway, I said, and you got a cease and desist from one of these hospitals just because you listed their hospital on your website. And then days later, you got 8 more cease and desists simultaneously. And so I thought, gee whiz, what a coincidence that they all knew to to send the cease and desist at the same time. And Clinton, you don't have to say anything, so it doesn't make you guys look bad. But I sent FOIA requests into UCLA Medical because I wanted to see how their attorneys were coordinating with other hospitals to send cease and desist against you. They didn't know that the other hospitals did or did not have relationships with you. Somehow, UCLA Medical alerted 7 or 8 other hospital systems to force you to take it off your website. And again, you don't have to speak to it because you did what they asked. You complied with their cease and desist, so you were within the legal boundaries that they set you. However, when I submitted a request to UCLA Medical to find out who their attorney was talking with at other university hospital systems, they didn't want to give it to me. They gave me everything except those emails. So that it showed coordination, and one of the members of their hospital system that was involved, apparently, but again, the emails were redacted or not included, was a former blue blood. What is it? Blue Red Cross donation system. Is that what they call it? I forget.
Yeah.
So
that
there was coordination to prevent you from having a blood supply that was available.
Well, let me add another kind of coordination. So the American Red Cross, a blood network that controls Minnesota and northern Wisconsin, and also another blood provider in Texas, all around the same time, roughly around July of last year, started restricting directed donations to people who had previously been receiving them. I spoke with a woman who is awaiting a bone marrow transplant, and her blood levels occasionally drop. She's previously had several directed donations at her hospital, and then her doctor warned her they're making changes so that people like you will not be eligible. She then had to go to Florida. Last I spoke with her, she was so sick she did not need blood yet, but she was worried that she would because she wouldn't be well enough to travel if she did. So this is something that's really hurting people, and it looks coordinated. Particularly because the same policies came about in these different blood providers with different means, right? The American Red Cross changed paperwork that they dumped on physicians to make it onerous and a possible HIPAA violation for the doctors to do that work. In Minnesota, they did other things, but it was all at the same time. And, we have different theories as to what might be motivating this, but the general concern that the blood isn't good, especially with what Warner is saying from people who are saying, look, you can just visually see it's different. If they can look at it and visually see it's different, they're having, an uh-oh moment. Like this is going to be terrible for us. And it might be as simple as simply trying to protect their business from widespread knowledge that there are risks inherent in the blood that they're giving out.
I think that you hit an important point there that I was fairly naive many years ago about the business of blood. Assumed it was all a nice, happy donation-based charity, but in fact, a lot of this blood is actually sold to pharmaceutical companies for research purposes. It's not necessarily a charity-driven marketplace, is it?
No, I think it's marketed as a charity.
Yes. Hey, sorry, I had that backwards.
Right. And it's marketed as, absolutely. It's marketed as a charity. And they'll say, look, only 3% of the population is giving. We need more people to give blood. But then if you come with your own blood, this should be a net gain, right? Like we're going to bring our own blood. That should be increasing the number of donors. But they said, no, we don't want that. We don't want it done that way.
Yeah, that's good.
I came across a woman about 2 years ago whose daughter was at the end stages of her cancer battle. And she was asking on Nextdoor for unvaccinated blood donors to donate to her daughter to help her recover a little bit and buy her a little bit more time as she was in end-of-life care. What was interesting was, on one hand, you had a lot of people that came up and offered to help this woman and her daughter. And then you had, on the other side, attacks. Why would you want unvaccinated blood? What's the problem with the vaccinated blood? And it was like a very, I don't know, it was a strange experience to see people attacking a woman whose child was dying because she had a preference for her care and treatment for her daughter.
Well, this is very similar to what Dr. Marty McCary reported on in his book, Blood, in his chapter on HIV. And the doctor there, that one of the doctors who first came to the conclusion, this HIV outbreak should affect my patients and be putting the blood they're receiving at risk. The early response to him was that he was reprimanded by senior doctors where he worked. So you see this over and over again. It's kind of the mob gangs up on the people with the uncomfortable truth that they don't want to have to deal with.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, is the mob ganged up on you?
Yeah, you can see I'm getting some gray hairs these days, Warner. Yeah, it's.
Well, I'm way ahead of you, man. We're all gray.
Yeah. I'm used to the mob. The mob does not like what we have to say, but eventually they fall. It's just, but it just takes time, unfortunately. But we're in a better position now with platforms like this and a more decentralized internet to be able to get the message out than we have been in the past. I think in the past they had a stronger stranglehold on maintaining a mob narrative than they can maintain today.
Yeah, and I do sit here thinking about the attorney's role in all this, and there's obviously all kinds of things with the blood supply that I can see litigation. I have a note to myself, litigation, and I want to go back and look at the old HIV litigation because of the contamination that happened then. And I think some of that needs to be brought again. But of course, Kevin, to your point, we're going to need testing. If somebody's had a transfusion, what has happened? Are they now producing spike protein? And I don't know whether you've seen that type of situation arise yet, but I suspect that if it hasn't come to your attention, it will soon.
Yeah, so there are several labs that are running testing, as I mentioned earlier. We're coordinating with some of them. We've put the primer sequences public, so anyone can kind of roll their own PCR assay, if they will, off of what we've generated. Philip Buchholz and a few others have made some other primer as well, primers that are nice contributions to the field. If people don't want to go through the headache of rolling their own PCR assay, we have them kitted here and tubed for some collaborators who like to just get them all pre-packaged and ready. We don't run a lot of the testing here because we're not a CLIA laboratory. We tend to sell those picks and shovels to the CLIA laboratories that are running this. But I think it's a very large a demand that's out there, and there's not enough labs.
And let's be clear, for the audience, again, the primer sequence, what this does is you're able to test the blood against the sequence, and the primer, depending on how it reacts, identifies what is present in that blood. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we look at four things in blood. We look at for the spike sequence, which is very unique actually compared to the proteins. The proteins only differ by 2 amino acids. The actual DNA sequence that encodes that protein is only 70% identical between the vaccine and the virus. So it's very easy to split apart a vaccine from virus at the DNA level. So people like that aspect about PCR is you don't get confused over the spike protein when you're using PCR. You know which molecule it is. It's a really smoking gun fingerprint for it being Pfizer or Moderna that are present. In addition to that, we look at the SV40 region. We look at the origin of replication in the vaccines for Moderna and Pfizer, and we throw in a human gene as well to ensure that there's RNA, there's DNA or RNA from a human in there. That's like an internal control. You want to see that every PCR reaction should light up for at least that if you're getting it from human blood, and then depending on what other three assays light up on the vaccine front, we can differentiate whether it's Moderna, Pfizer, or J&J.
That was actually my next question. How long have you been able to differentiate between the different vaccines that people took and the spike that's being produced from those vaccines?
We've been able to do that from the start. We designed them we had sequenced all three of them out of the gate. So we designed the primers to differentiate between those three. The spike assay lights up on all three of them. The SV40 only lights up on Pfizer, and the origin lights up on both Moderna and Pfizer, but not J&J. So it's kind of a decision tree you go through with which assays are positive.
And I have a question about the J&J. Is that one also, are you seeing longer term production of spike? Because J&J also triggers, right, the cellular production of the spike.
Yes. So I've not seen a lot of J&J patients because they kind of pulled that one off the market so early that we got our hands on the vaccine. I've never gotten a patient sample that was hit with J&J. I've only seen Moderna and Pfizer patients come through it.
Well, that would be interesting if people were potentially J&J injured. That it would be great to see whether there's a continued production and spike. I don't mean to use the word great. It'd be horrible to see that there
horrible to see, right? Yeah, that is it's a adenovirus DNA vaccine, so there's a chance that one sticks around even longer. I don't know. The jury's still out on that.
Yeah.
Let's say it's discovered that yes, the blood supply is tainted and all of the vaccinated people that donated all their blood has to go into the trash can.
I think the first thing they're going to have to do is do a time course to look at blood that was taken, 1 week, 1 month, 6 months after vaccination to see is it in all of it, or is it like gone by 6 months after vaccination? And then what percent of the sample 6 months after vaccination? Because there's clearly a subpopulation of people that are producing this for a very long period of time, but not everybody is. This is, I think, is important to state to get clear on that there seems to be a bad lot issue going on here. That, like, if you look at the adverse events, like 78% of them are in 4% of the lots, according to that Schmeling paper, and that work's been reproduced in a couple different jurisdictions now. So there's a set of lots that are really bad at adverse events, and I suspect they're contaminated in a different way or manner or made poorly such that this effect manifests in a subset of people. That could mean, optimistically, that maybe half the blood supply is fine because they took the blood after 6 months later or didn't get a bad lot, but they got to do the initial work to sort that out if they want to salvage it. I mean, one approach you're suggesting, John, is like, wipe it all out. Anyone that's vaccinated, don't touch it, and only use unvaccinated blood. I don't think they can afford to do that based on how much blood on a given day. So triaging the blood supply is probably what they're going to have to do.
So let me ask this then. Have you tested blood that is provided from the American Red Cross to confirm that it's still unfiltered blood? That's because I know when they take blood, they do something with it first.
Yes,
to purify it or whatever.
Well, we've not gotten any blood directly from the Red Cross. We've only been seeing this in studies where they're pulling blood from people and sequencing them, and it turns up in their sequencing data weeks later because they sequence them at certain time points in these studies, and you can see it 14 days out in some of those studies. So you're like, okay.
So is it possible that it gets filtered out?
Would you mean when they're preparing the blood and filtering the I have to go back and look at those. They definitely found it in people have found it in plasma, which is sort of the top layer of the blood, and they found it in monocytes. So I suspect it's actually in some of the cells. Like the cells are transfected with it and it's buried. So there's no freeing the blood of this just through a plasmapheresis. I think they're going to have to deal with when there's positivity on any of this blood. They're going to have to, if someone doesn't want that, they're going to have to resort to blood that has not been vaccinated. I don't know what purifying is out.
Has the federal government, HHS, or anyone directly acknowledged this risk to the American blood supply?
I don't think so. I mean, it's news to me. I try to keep track of this, but I've not seen anything out of the out of HHS lately in this. The best news I've seen recently is just Jay Bhattacharya coming to the conclusion quite publicly on Bannon's show that this platform's dead. That there's not enough Americans that believe in it to have a vaccine program that uses mRNA, because you're only going to get 10% adoption or 20% adoption, and that doesn't do anything for herd immunity. So until public trust is rebuilt in mRNA, this thing is unfundable.
Clinton, what have you seen from the federal government?
Well, so this would be breaking news for you all here, but just this week, this past week, we sent a letter to the HHS at the request of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., not Safe Blood specifically, but the National Health Federation, with what were the leading priorities that we needed to see happen in regards to health freedom and protection from the mRNA consequences of that vaccine. And so I submitted the language on what needed to be done to protect and ensure the safety of the blood supply. And that paragraph, I was pleased to see they they promoted that to the third place in the list of things that they were looking for to accomplish. So, HSS now, as of Monday of last week, has now been, made aware of that. So that's good. We'd also like to bring forward, I'm working with Dr. James Thorpe, the, renowned obstetrician, on looking at cases, doing a case series of people who have been injured from the mRNA vaccine through the blood, as demonstrated by the fact that they were not vaccinated, and then post-transfusion, they developed adverse reactions known to be vaccine reactions and not blood, not typical blood.
Well, get that blood up to Kevin as soon as possible.
Let's be happy to PCR. If it's positive, we'll sequence it and see if there's any integration events.
And it's kind of coming full circle. Jim has, been so good on maternal health in the years there, and the description of what's happening with placentas and babies and losses. He's really been helpful, and he's been very helpful to me personally. So I appreciate you bringing up his name.
We do have a few IRBs in place to do these types of investigations, so we can chat offline, Clinton, if there's a way that can fit into one of those IRB study designs to.
That would be great. Yeah,
John, when we close this out, maybe let's just keep it online for a second so we can talk.
And then Warner, I have a question for you. Do you like the things that we've just talked about? Kevin's been talking about testing, and the other thing that I had pointed out, labeling. If they just tracked. I was speaking to a cancer patient yesterday who, when he was biopsied, that led to bleeding in the tumor. He's gotten a couple of units from non-vaccinated donors, just I think arranging this himself. And he's waiting another 4 days for the next ones to come through. But in the meantime, if he runs short of blood, then he's got to take something off the shelf. And it was so, tough to talk to him and say, well, the only thing you can do is wait, and maybe a volume expander works or something to get you through that window, because they're not tracking it. And so it's such a simple solution would mean this person wouldn't have to be undergoing the stress and concern that he is. And what do you think is what's necessary to bring about these things like testing and tracking to really impose it upon the blood banks?
I mean, like I said, under HIV, and my memory's a little cloudy about those lawsuits, but there was a lawsuit because of someone contracting HIV after the donation. So if you saw the integration of DNA in someone after a blood transfusion, and it started to affect their health, God forbid, I think that's not protected by the PrEP Act. That would be a case, a colorable case that we could bring. Okay. And I think that's where we do step up, but we need to be prepared and ready to go for that. And we do, like I said, we do have a model. I think the attorneys, I could just tell you, I'm in a discussion every week with the attorneys. The attorneys are all over this, like it's, they are actively considering all of these coming possibilities for lawsuits and trying to prepare themselves for it.
Yeah, and just to put a finer point on that, I don't think you'd have to prove integration. I think if we just showed spike protein moved from one patient to a recipient, or the DNA and RNA ended up in that recipient, that's enough. There's literature showing that you don't need integration for this to cause cancer. So
you are going to need harm, though. So we have to have
harm. Need harm, but we don't. I don't think we need to prove the mechanism of harm down to whether it's integrated or not integrated, because there's literature out there showing DNA, just cytosolic DNA, can trigger cancer. And it can replicate episomally. It doesn't have to be in the chromosomes. They like to pin us to it has to integrate to be a problem, but that's because they know that's harder and rare to find. There's plenty of literature out there showing just the spike protein alone it downregulates p53. And if you've moved spike protein from one patient to another without consent, then there's probably some harm that we can point to.
And p53 is a protective part of our system, our immune system, which helps suppress cells that are going in a cancerous direction. Is that correct? Right.
Yeah, it is. It's basically a DNA repair enzyme that cleans up errors in the genome. And so when you turn that thing off, your cells are going to run loose and lead to cancer.
And generally, the vaccine has suppressed that in general in the population of the vaccine.
There's two potential mechanisms. I think the best mechanism published to date was from Wafik Eldieri, who published this. I think it's Zhang et al. In OncoTarget, showing that it suppresses the expression of that gene. And there's also some evidence that the SV40 promoters are binding to P53. We don't know if they're inhibiting the gene or what it's doing to the gene. We just know that it's interacting with the gene. So those two hits are a concern, that we have both the protein and the DNA that's in there that could be influencing P53.
I'm not sure I have a grip on that. SV40 binding to the P53. Tell me what that.
Yeah, Draymond et al. Published that. There's the sequence that's in the vaccine's plasmid. There's probably 50 to 500 billion copies of that in every dose, is known to bind to the P53 enzyme. That has us worried that if that enzyme is completely soaked in DNA targets, it can't be doing its job cleaning up the human genome. Its job is to bind DNA and clean it up. But if you put a bunch of SV40 promoters in there to saturate the P53 enzymes, it's going to be decoy, basically.
I want to point out that this was part of something that we'd done some research in. The National Cancer Institute was aware that P53 was being suppressed by spike protein as early as August of 2021. And they were involved in this suppression campaign to remove a study against the will of one of the authors. And so what I did was I submitted public records FOIA requests to the National Cancer Institute for a guy named Eric Fried, who was editor-in-chief of MDPI Viruses, which was a Swiss-based nonprofit. I submitted FOIA requests asking for specific details on emails that he would have sent through his official government email address regarding this paper. And the NIH and NCI sent back a response that they found 490 pages of communications and refused to release any of them. Meanwhile, this study was forced off of and force retracted, and one of the authors said that they had been coerced to try to take it down, and the other vanished. So this was
this was high energy. Yeah, that was a complete catastrophe what they did.
You can read all about this at NIHgate.com.
Yeah.
Still waiting on those papers, by the way. I need to probably resubmit. Now that
we probably
sheriff.
We probably need to get your FOIA lawsuit spun up too, Johnny.
Siri and his team was also working on it. So I don't know. I don't know if they decided not to pursue it or what. But, you know, I know that one of the people that handled the FOIA request when I sent an appeal was involved previously with NSA, CIA, and DOD, which goes back to your point, Warner, that the COVID vaccine was a DOD weapon or countermeasure.
That's not even my point. It's the contract.
Right. It's in the papers.
Papers.
Gentlemen, I don't know if we're going to solve this problem in the hour that we have, but we're getting close to the end. Is there anything anybody wants to add?
Well, we're getting a lot closer to solving the problem from this conversation. I'm pretty convinced, because I think we will, if we don't already have the blood, and we very well might, from Celia Corral. You can see her story on our website that could be tested. We will have people who have this. It's a certainty. It's just a matter of finding them, and in which case we will be able to test it, as Kevin has described, and Warner will be able to put forward his case. So this is huge, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's another collaboration that might help on this. Is I know Sabine has a CLIA license, and it might be able to help out on getting some of this stuff tested as well. Our main issue has been finding CLIA labs that will run the testing. There's a couple of them that are booting up, but we can talk offline on a few of the other ones as well that are that might play a role in getting it tested. If you guys don't have a testing facility there that's up and running, CLIA certified. In fact, I don't even know if we need CLIA for testing blood. That's a separate question that we can probably sort out later.
All right.
Well, I want to thank these two guys because this idea of safe blood, is just really critical. And Clinton, your effort, it just brings this to light. It brings it to the public. It brings it to the public in a way they understand, in a way that they've reacted to in the past, with the HIV contamination and the concerns there. So I think this is a real fault line that can be exploited. And Kevin, I can't keep up with you, man. you're all over the place. I really, really appreciate everything you've done.
Kevin gets so many rocks thrown at him. He's taking the risk of looking under the rock that they don't want him to look under, and he's seeing all the bugs and roaches and snakes.
Well, I don't know how you managed to do all these interviews that you've so graciously agreed to do with everybody all around the world, but just thank you.
Thank you for all the legal help on this, because without lawyers, I'm feckless on this front. So it's very good to have people step up, and Clint, and your front as well. We need innovators to come in here and build other tools. My hands are tied. I've got a business doing something completely else, and I can't really redirect it this direction. But I'm trying to hand the ropes off and help as best I can where it can help patients, because there's a lot of injured people out there, and they're not going to get better if we just hope and pray. We have to start building things.
Absolutely.
And they're in an emergency, just like a flooding emergency or anything else. I mean, they are truly in an emergency, and we're ignoring these millions of people.
Yes.
And they deserve a rapid response at a national level.
They do. And I think we finally have a favorable administration to get some of that done. So, now's the time.
Yep. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sure we will have you back if you'll still take my calls. Have a great day.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right.
Freedom Council is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Council is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcouncil.org.